My wife banned my entire family from meeting our newborn while her family visited daily. I stayed silent until I discovered the real reason she was hiding from me. I used to believe that the hardest part of becoming a parent would be the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the quiet fear of doing something wrong with a life so small and fragile. But I was painfully wrong. Because the real nightmare didn't begin with the birth of our child. It began with the moment I realized that the woman I loved had already chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. When our baby was born, I was exhausted but happy, the kind of tired that still feels warm because it's wrapped in love and responsibility, and I thought we were finally stepping into a chapter that would bring us closer, a chapter where we would operate as a team, protect our child together, and face the outside world united. But instead, what I walked into was a quiet, calculated separation that I didn't see coming. At first, it sounded reasonable, almost caring, when she said she wanted privacy, when she explained that too many visitors would be overwhelming, that bonding time mattered, that we needed space to adjust, and I agreed without hesitation. Because I trusted her, because I believed we were making decisions together, because I had no idea that those rules were never meant to apply equally. What I didn't notice right away were the small inconsistencies, the way her phone buzzed constantly while she insisted we needed silence, the way she would disappear into the bedroom for long calls while I stayed in the living room holding our newborn. Whispering lullabies and convincing myself that everything was normal, that exhaustion was playing tricks on my perception. Then the visit started. Not announced, not discussed, not even acknowledged as exceptions, just happening naturally, casually, like they had always been part of the plan. Her mother stopping by, just to help, her sister coming in for a few minutes, her family filling the house with noise, opinions, laughter, advice, while I stood there holding my child, watching the rules bend and break in real time. I didn't say anything at first, because I didn't want conflict, because I didn't want to seem insensitive, because I told myself that this was temporary, that once things settled, the same openness would extend to my family too. But deep down, something felt wrong, not loud enough to confront, but heavy enough to sit in my chest. The first time I mentioned my parents, the shift was immediate. Her tone changed, her body stiffened, her words carefully chosen, as if she had been waiting for this moment, and she said things like, "They can wait," like, "This isn't about them," like, "You don't understand what my body just went through." And suddenly the conversation wasn't about fairness or balance anymore. It was about authority, about control, about who got to decide what kind of father I was allowed to be. I tried to reason with her, calmly, gently, explaining that my parents weren't strangers, that they weren't careless, that they weren't demanding anything unreasonable. They just wanted to see their grandchild, to hold the life that carried part of them. But she shut it down every time, not with shouting, not with tears, but with an unmovable certainty that left no room for discussion. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about recovery, or bonding, or protection. This was about exclusion. I was watching my own family be erased from my child's life while another family was being written in permanent ink, and the worst part wasn't the ban itself, it was the way she spoke, as if this was already decided, as if my agreement was assumed, as if my role ended the moment the baby was born. That night, as I sat alone in the dim light of the living room, listening to my child breathe softly in my arms while her family's laughter echoed from the bedroom, I realized something that terrified me more than exhaustion ever could. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being sidelined. And whatever this was, whatever game was being played under the excuse of what's best for the baby, I knew one thing for sure: if I didn't face it now, I would spend the rest of my life watching decisions about my child be made without me. And that was something I couldn't accept. What made everything worse wasn't the arguments we didn't have, but the conversations that never truly existed, the ones where I spoke and she listened only long enough to prepare her response. The ones where every concern I raised was quietly reframed as selfishness, ignorance, or a lack of empathy, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to understand that this wasn't a disagreement between two tired parents. It was a narrative being constructed where I was already cast as the problem. She started saying things like, "You're stressing me out," like, "This energy isn't good for the baby," like, "Why can't you just support me instead of making everything about your family?" And each sentence landed carefully, deliberately, designed to make me question my intentions, my instincts, even my right to feel hurt, and I hated how effective it was, how easily concern could be twisted into guilt when spoken with enough certainty. Meanwhile, her family's presence grew more permanent, less like visits and more like occupation, their shoes by the door, their food in the fridge, their opinions filling every quiet space, and I watched as my role shifted from partner to background character. The father who changed diapers and held the baby at night, but had no voice during the day, no authority in a house that no longer felt like mine. I tried once more to bring it up, choosing my words carefully, explaining that it wasn't about excluding her family, that I wasn't asking for control, only balance. Only the same grace she was extending so freely on one side and denying entirely on the other. But she didn't hear balance, she heard threat, and her response was colder than anything she'd said before. She told me my parents made her uncomfortable, that their energy wasn't right, that she didn't feel safe being vulnerable around them, and when I asked why, when I pressed gently for something concrete, something real, she had nothing specific to offer. Just vague discomfort and emotional language that left no room for discussion, because how do you argue with feelings that refuse to be defined? That was the moment I realized the rules weren't temporary, they weren't flexible, and they weren't meant to change, because every boundary she set for my family came with no expiration date, while every exception for hers appeared effortlessly. Justified without explanation, accepted without question, and protected fiercely. What hurt the most wasn't even my parents' disappointment, though I could hear it in their voices when I made excuses for why they still hadn't met their grandchild. It was the slow erosion of trust between me and the woman I was supposed to be building a life with. Because every lie I told on her behalf chipped away at something inside me, something I wasn't sure I could get back. I started noticing how often she spoke for me, how she answered questions before I could, how she framed decisions as mutual even when they weren't, how she used phrases like, "we decided," when I had never been part of the conversation. And I wondered how long this had been happening, how much power I had already surrendered without realizing it. Late at night, when the house was finally quiet and her family had gone home, I would sit awake holding my child, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every dismissal, every subtle reminder that my voice carried less weight than it used to. And a terrifying thought began to take shape, one I tried desperately to ignore. If this was how things were now, if this was how easily my role could be minimized, my family erased, my concerns invalidated, then what would happen the next time we disagreed, the next decision, the next boundary, the next line she decided to draw without me? Because this wasn't just about visits anymore. This was about control. And I could feel it tightening, slowly, deliberately, around a future I was no longer sure I recognized. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly, disguised as cooperation, wrapped in the language of compromise, and that's what made it so dangerous. Because when someone learns to control without raising their voice, the damage spreads before you realize you're bleeding. She suggested a temporary solution, a phrase that sounded harmless enough, almost reasonable, where her family would continue visiting because they were already in the rhythm, while mine would wait until things felt more stable. And I watched as she said it with such calm confidence that anyone listening would assume this had already been agreed upon, and for a moment I almost believed it myself. I tried to push back, not angrily, not emotionally, just logically, asking what stable meant, asking for a clear line, a moment, a condition that would allow my parents the same access hers enjoyed daily, but she couldn't give me one. And instead redirected the conversation toward how difficult postpartum life was, how unsupported she felt, how my insistence was adding pressure she couldn't handle. That's when I understood the trap. Any resistance from me was immediately framed as harm to her, and by extension, harm to the baby, and suddenly my desire for fairness became a threat, my voice became a stressor, and my presence in the conversation itself became optional. Something she could tolerate only when it didn't interfere with her decisions. What truly shook me was how easily her family reinforced it. Her mother would nod along sympathetically, her sister would offer gentle comments about first-time moms needing control, and every word they spoke, every look they exchanged, made it clear that this wasn't spontaneous, it was coordinated. A shared understanding that I was the obstacle to be managed, not the partner to be respected. I started keeping mental notes, not because I wanted conflict, but because I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, and I needed proof, something solid to hold onto when the gaslighting crept in, when I was told I was imagining things, when my concerns were brushed aside as exhaustion or insecurity. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear, her voice low, measured, confident, explaining to her mother how standing firm now would set the tone for the future, how giving in even once would invite constant interference, and how it was easier to establish dominance early than to try and regain it later. Dominance. That word echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. Because it confirmed what I had been afraid to name, that this wasn't about safety or healing or boundaries, it was about power, about shaping the dynamic while I was vulnerable, sleep-deprived, emotionally stretched thin, and trusting enough to assume we were still on the same team. I didn't confront her immediately, not because I was scared, but because I needed to see how far this went, because part of me still hoped there was misunderstanding, still wanted to believe that the woman I loved hadn't deliberately planned to push me aside. But hope has a way of blinding you when the truth is standing right in front of you. And as I watched my parents' messages go unanswered, their gifts sit unopened in the corner, their excitement slowly replaced by confusion and hurt, I realized that waiting wasn't protecting the peace, it was enabling the erosion of something fundamental. Something that, once lost, would be almost impossible to reclaim. This wasn't a phase. This was a precedent being set. And unless something changed, it would define not just my role as a husband, but my place in my child's life forever. I finally stopped pretending that patience was a virtue in a situation designed to exhaust me, because patience without boundaries is just surrender dressed up as maturity, and the moment I accepted that truth, everything I had been swallowing began to surface with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. I asked for a real conversation, not in front of her family, not between feedings or interruptions, but alone, just the two of us, and when she agreed with that same calm confidence that had started to feel less reassuring and more calculated, I knew this would either reset everything or expose it completely, and I braced myself for both outcomes. I told her I felt erased, not as a son, not as a husband, but as a father, that decisions about my child were being made around me instead of with me, that my family was being treated like a threat while hers operated with unlimited access. And that if we didn't address this now, it would rot into something much bigger than visits or boundaries, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually hear me. Instead, she sighed. Not in exhaustion, but in disappointment, the kind that makes you feel like you failed a test you didn't know you were taking, and she said she was shocked I would make this about myself, that she expected more support, more understanding, more loyalty during a time when she felt vulnerable, and suddenly the conversation wasn't about equality anymore, it was about my alleged inability to put her needs first. I pointed out the contradiction, gently but firmly, that putting her needs first didn't mean eliminating mine, that partnership didn't require my silence, that protecting our child didn't justify excluding half of their family. But she interrupted me, her voice sharper now, accusing me of trying to control the situation, of weaponizing logic against her emotions, and that was the moment I realized she had already decided who I was in this story. What stunned me most was how prepared she seemed, how every response I offered had a counter already waiting, how every concern was rerouted into an accusation, and how easily she framed herself as the sole protector standing between our child and imagined chaos, while I was reduced to someone whose involvement needed to be managed. Then she said something I couldn't forget. She told me that if I pushed this, if I insisted on involving my family before she was ready, it would damage our marriage irreparably, and she didn't say it as a threat, she said it as a fact, calm, measured, final. And in that instant I understood that this wasn't a disagreement anymore, it was an ultimatum delivered with a smile. I left the room feeling smaller than I had in years, not because I was wrong, but because I was suddenly aware of how isolated I had become inside my own home, how my support system had been quietly severed, how my voice had been framed as dangerous simply because it didn't align with hers. And yet, beneath the fear and frustration, something else was growing, something steadier, something far less fragile than anger, the realization that if I accepted this now, if I allowed this version of reality to solidify, I would be teaching my child a lesson I never intended to pass down, that one parent's authority outweighs the other's existence. That night, holding my child in the dark while the house slept, I made a decision I knew would change everything, not impulsively, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of someone who understands that some lines must be drawn before they disappear entirely. I wasn't going to fight her family. I wasn't going to beg for permission. But I also wasn't going to disappear. And whatever came next, whatever fallout followed, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I was done being managed in my own life. What I didn't expect was how quickly my refusal to disappear would be interpreted as rebellion, because the moment I stopped backing down, the atmosphere in the house shifted, not loudly, not violently, but subtly. Like a door quietly locking behind you while you're still inside, and I could feel the resistance building in every look, every pause, every carefully chosen word. She began documenting everything, or at least that's what it felt like. Every comment I made, every suggestion, every moment I tried to assert myself, all of it suddenly framed as evidence of my instability, my lack of support, my inability to respect boundaries, and it was chilling to watch how easily concern could be reframed as aggression when the narrative needed it to be. Her family became quieter around me, more observant, the conversation stopping when I entered the room, the glances exchanged when I spoke, as if a silent agreement had been reached without my participation. And I realized that whatever I was pushing against wasn't just her, it was an entire system that had already decided who held authority and who needed to be corrected. I tried one last time to reach for common ground, suggesting mediation, counseling, even just a neutral third party to help us talk without turning everything into a battlefield, but she dismissed it instantly, saying we didn't need outsiders interfering, that our issues were private, and the irony almost made me laugh, because my family had already been pushed out completely under the same justification. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. She had started making plans without telling me. Appointments, visits, decisions about the baby's routine, all arranged and communicated through her family before I ever heard about them, and when I questioned it, she acted surprised, insisting she thought I already knew, insisting I had agreed, insisting I was forgetting things again, and suddenly I was back in that familiar fog where reality felt slippery and self-doubt crept in uninvited. But this time, I didn't let it settle. I started keeping records, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation, noting dates, conversations, messages, patterns, because something inside me knew that clarity would be my only defense if this continued to escalate, and the more I paid attention, the more obvious it became that this wasn't chaos, it was strategy. The hardest part was the loneliness. Not being alone physically, because the house was always full, but being alone in a way that makes you feel invisible, unheard, easily dismissed, and I found myself holding my child longer than necessary, not just out of love, but out of grounding. Reminding myself that I existed, that I mattered, that I wasn't imagining the imbalance I was living inside. And somewhere between the sleepless nights and the quiet observations, a resolve formed that felt heavier than fear but steadier than anger, the understanding that protecting my child didn't just mean shielding them from the outside world. It meant protecting them from a future where one parent's voice erased the other's, where love came with conditions, where control masqueraded as care. I didn't know yet how this would end, or how far she was willing to take it, but I knew I was done reacting, done explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. And as I watched her family pass my child from arm to arm while mine remained strangers by design, I made myself a quiet promise. This wouldn't stay one-sided forever. And when the balance finally shifted, it wouldn't be because I demanded it loudly, but because I refused to let the truth be rewritten without a witness. The shift didn't come with an explosion, it came with a pause, a moment where I stopped explaining myself altogether, because I had finally understood that clarity doesn't come from repeating the truth to people who benefit from misunderstanding it. And the silence I chose wasn't passive, it was deliberate, observant, and quietly strategic. I began reclaiming space in ways that couldn't be argued with, not by confrontation, but by consistency, by being present with my child without asking permission, by making decisions calmly and confidently, by speaking less, but meaning more. And I could see how uncomfortable it made her, how the lack of emotional reaction disrupted the dynamic she had grown accustomed to controlling. She tried to provoke a response, subtle comments about how I was different lately, how I seemed distant, how she hoped I wasn't resentful, and I recognized the pattern instantly, because when control starts slipping, it's often masked as concern. And I refused to take the bait, choosing instead to focus on my role as a father, grounded, attentive, unshakable. What she didn't realize was that while she had been coordinating narratives, I had been strengthening reality. I reconnected with my family honestly, without excuses or vague explanations, telling them the truth without embellishment, without drama, and the relief in their voices reminded me of what support actually feels like when it isn't conditional, when it doesn't require silence in exchange for access, and for the first time in weeks, I felt anchored again. The tension in the house thickened, not because I was pushing harder, but because I was no longer retreating, and she sensed it, the way someone senses a door closing behind them even when no sound is made. And the subtle authority she had wielded so confidently now faced resistance she couldn't easily redefine. She tried once more to assert control, announcing decisions instead of discussing them, assuming compliance instead of cooperation. But this time, I calmly said no, not loudly, not defensively, just no. And the word hung in the air longer than anything else we had said in months, heavy with implication. That single refusal changed everything. Because once a boundary is drawn and not erased, it becomes visible, undeniable, and I watched as her confidence faltered, her certainty wavered, and for the first time, she had to confront the possibility that the dynamic she had carefully constructed was no longer guaranteed. I didn't celebrate it, didn't escalate it, didn't weaponize it, because this wasn't about winning an argument, it was about reclaiming a role that should never have been negotiable in the first place. And I knew that whatever came next would test that resolve in ways I wasn't yet prepared for. But as I held my child that night, feeling their small hand curl around my finger, I understood something with a clarity that cut through every doubt. This was bigger than visits, bigger than families, bigger than power struggles disguised as protection. This was about whether my child would grow up seeing partnership or dominance, balance or silence, and I was finally ready to stand in that truth, no matter what it cost, because some fights aren't loud, they're quiet, steady, and impossible to undo once you choose to stop stepping back. By the time the final confrontation arrived, it didn't feel like drama or shouting, it felt like inevitability, like a long-held secret finally stepping into the light, because all the small adjustments, the quiet refusals, the careful documentation, the calm insistence on fairness, they had accumulated, and the balance had begun to shift in ways she hadn't anticipated, ways she couldn't control. Her family noticed it first, subtle looks exchanged across the room, questions asked in whispers, hints that the rules were changing, and I could see the panic forming behind her calm facade. The kind of panic that comes from realizing that the foundation you built on manipulation is cracking under the weight of quiet, consistent truth. She tried to reassert authority, making statements about who would visit when, what decisions were hers alone, but this time I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't justify, I simply acted, calmly, decisively. And every action spoke louder than any word, because control is only as strong as the compliance it receives, and she was no longer guaranteed that compliance. Then came the moment I had been waiting for without fully realizing it, when my family arrived, warmly, patiently, no confrontation, just presence, and as they held their grandchild, laughed softly, whispered words of love, I watched her tighten. Watched her flinch at the undeniable reality that fairness wasn't negotiable anymore, that exclusion was no longer possible, and that her carefully orchestrated world had cracks she couldn't patch with excuses. Messages started coming, her frustration, her disbelief, her questions about how this happened, but I didn't respond with anger, I didn't escalate, because the point had been made in the most powerful way possible. I existed, I had a voice, and I would not be erased. She tried one last tactic, subtle guilt, claims of being unsupported, hints of, if only you understood, but I had learned the language of her manipulation, and I let her speak while my attention remained on what mattered, our child, our family, our truth. And for the first time, the tension in the room no longer dictated my reality. By the end, she was forced to acknowledge what I already knew, that control built on exclusion cannot survive transparency, that authority gained by silencing others is fragile when faced with patience and presence, and that the love, respect, and bond one shared with my child and my family were stronger than fear, manipulation, or resentment. I didn't celebrate her discomfort, I didn't gloat. I simply breathed in the quiet of a home where fairness finally existed, where my child could see both sides of love, and where I understood fully that victory isn't about revenge. It isn't about forcing acknowledgement, it's about standing firm, being present, and refusing to disappear, even when the world tries to write you out of your own story. And in that moment, I felt it clearly. The house had changed, but not because of fights or ultimatums, because of a quiet strength that cannot be ignored. And the lesson she would carry from this, the lesson I hope my child will carry, is simple yet powerful. Fairness cannot be denied, and those who try to erase others will eventually meet the truth of presence and patience, and nothing, no manipulation, no exclusion, can undo that.